Hello, and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. This is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for listening. Something a little personal about me, I donate annually to Wikipedia. Why? Because I use it regularly and I value it. Pretty simple. Of all the things that I support in the course of a year that I wish I didn't have to, like oil companies when I buy gas or pay utilities, or Meta when I use Instagram, Facebook, or WhatsApp, I also want to make sure that I tangibly support the things that I actually care about and want to remain part of our world, and that I can continue to expand my knowledge and bring more quality of life to my life. So I donate to Wikipedia. I shop at farmers markets, and I buy wine from local producers who strive to be beyond organic. If you enjoy and value this podcast, please consider supporting it. You can support this podcast by making a donation at beyondorganicwine.com. You can also become a Patreon subscriber for a very low monthly gift, and that link is in the show notes of every episode. You can also sponsor an episode. Just email me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com, and we can discuss sponsorship. And even just taking a literal minute of your time to give a great review on your podcast app is valuable. Thank you so much to those of you who already have and continue to give to make this podcast possible. I'm going to resist for as long as possible the meaningless advertising model that radio and many podcasts follow, because I have no desire to contribute to more mindless consumerism, and I want this podcast to continue to be free of that kind of influence. If you share that value, your support can make another way possible. Thank you for your support. When I fell in love with wine, it was a glass of something that tasted better than delicious. In fact, it tasted bigger than just the sense of taste and smell. I felt it in my core. I hadn't grown up with wine, so it wasn't just a part of the dinner table. It was something special. And this particular wine that I happened upon was even better than special. It felt magical. It so excited my curiosity and wonder that here I am, 20 years later, a wine grower, a winemaker, and a wine podcaster. That journey led me through the layers of pretense, the marketing and labeling and scoring and obsessing about a decontextualized beverage, until I discovered the source of that magic in the earth. Looking back now, wine was just a lure that the vines and their domesticated humans created to draw me beneath the surface into a deeper and deeper understanding of the miracle of life itself. As I have come to appreciate the beauty of the complexity of all the interdependent and inseparable lives that make my life possible, I've stopped looking for an outside purpose to my life. I began to see that life is imbued with purpose. It courses with meaning. This is what you can see when you look into the eyes of a fox. This is what you can see when you comprehend how a vine transmutes sunlight into substance, how it reaches with tendrils and unfolds leaves from the swirling cosmic energy that we bifurcate into life and death. You don't need a reason to live. Living is the reason. I do this podcast, in a sense, in homage to wine, in gratitude for drawing me into this sense of joyful reconnection with my source. If wine has this power, if the earth has this power, is it too much to refer to it as sacred? My guest for this episode is Cameron Clark. Cameron just finished a master's program at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Pollenzo, Italy. As part of completing his master's, he spent several months working on an ecological farm in Tyrol and wrote a thesis titled Spiritual Agriculture, Wellness and Sustainability, a case study of biodynamic agriculture in South Tyrol, Italy. When I read his thesis, I knew I had to have Cameron come onto the podcast to talk about it so that I could share it with you. He has also graciously allowed me to share the full thesis as a PDF that you can download on this episode page at beyondorganicwine.com. And there you can also find a link to the Three Sisters essay by Robin Wall Kimmerer that Cameron mentions during our conversation. Last week's episode with Garett Long about biodynamics asked us to reconsider what questions we haven't asked of our farming systems. In this episode, we discussed the central claim of Cameron's that a spiritual approach to agriculture is not just an optional add-on for farmers who happen to have that bent, but it is an essential part of the most efficacious and productive forms of agriculture and will be necessary as we navigate the transition away from anthropocentrism and a value system based on economics. Having said all this, Cameron's definition of spiritual may not be what that term normally conjures for you, so hang in there to hear how he defines spiritual agriculture. We also discuss, as Cameron does in his thesis, the conflicts that arise from trying to practice spiritual viticulture in an economically driven world, and the compromises, complexity, and nuance that results. These are the tough questions we face daily, whether we are directly involved in agriculture or not. And that's why I think you'll find this discussion with Cameron so relevant. As he says in his thesis, we have no choice but to use land. Our existence requires food procurement and energy usage, tying all of us into inextricable relations with the world that leave a wake in the lives of others. We are only left then with the choice of how to engage with our land in a life-diminishing or a life-promoting way. Enjoy. Cameron, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really excited to talk about everything with you today.
Cool. No, thank you, Adam. Really, really, I'm so happy to be here.
So one of the things I'll just sort of tease where we're headed, but you wrote a thesis, and we'll talk about why you are writing a thesis and all.
Indeed.
But you wrote a thesis titled Spiritual Agriculture, Wellness and Sustainability, a case study of biodynamic agriculture in South Tyrol, Italy, which you sent to me. I read, and I was like, this is everything that I think about on a daily basis. I think we really need to talk about this. I will get into what you say in that paper, but could you start about just introducing yourself and why you wrote this and where you are right now?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I just have to really thank you for reading the paper. And it's funny that you say that because, I mean, everything that you've spoken about on the podcast has really informed my view and informed my view of agriculture and ecology, the human nature relationship, etc., kind of coming into this paper. So we had our own little symbiosis going on, I
There we
think.
go. Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I've been listening for a few years. So right now, I guess I'll start there. I am currently in Italy. I'm in the northwestern Piemonte region, really right in the heart of the Piemonte wine growing region. I'm just outside of kind of the Barolo, Barbaresco area.
Mm,
And yeah, it's been quite a wine education being
yeah.
here for the past year. Um,
Making me and probably a lot of other people jealous right
I,
now.
I really have to pinch myself every day when I walk down to school. I mean, really, I'm looking right at these world-renowned vineyards, and it's just in my backyard.
And
Um,
I mean, and school is what, like a castle, a beautiful castle in the midst of this? Where
yeah,
where are you?
it is. Yeah, so this is my university is the University of Gastronomic Sciences. It's in Pollenzo, Italy, and this is the kind of the epicenter for slow food. The
Mm.
neighboring town of Bra is where slow food was founded. It's the hometown of Carlo Petrini, who's still around town. I just saw him yesterday, going to wave and say buongiorno, and he's so friendly.
Buongiorno.
Yeah, and so in at the early 2000s, I guess he had had a long time dream of starting a university based on the principles of slow food. And so in the early 2000s, that's exactly what they did. There's this old castle. It's actually of the royal Savoy family, who's a big, prominent
Mm.
family in the history of northern Italy. And it's their old kind of, I guess, summer home, but it's this beautiful regal castle that was a bit dilapidated at the time, but Slow Food kind of rebuilt this place into what's now a burgeoning, I mean, epicenter for food studies, right in the beautiful heart of Piemonte. Um, and since I'm on a wide podcast, I'll also mention, just to add one more point of jealousy for you, that in the basement of the castle is the Banca del Vino, or the wine bank, and it's literally the old cantina, the old wine cellar of the royal family, who I think were the first to kind of develop uh, the rich wine making tradition here of this area. So yeah, literally now in this old cantina, they've built a beautiful old wine museum where they house some of the, basically the idea is to curate a record of the Italian wine culture. So they
Mm,
have all of these old bottles from all of the historic vineyards in the area. You can go
oh,
down and do
wow.
tastings, and it's phenomenal. So all that to say,
Amazing.
yeah, I'm in
All that to
heaven
say, yeah, 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 yeah.
basically, or to just to say, come here, please. It's really
Teasing.
a
Yeah, no, that
spectacular
sounds
place.
amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah, no. Sorry,
yeah,
please go ahead.
no, just that. So yeah, what I'm doing here, I just finished a master's program here. And I was a farmer before this. I was a vegetable farmer for a few years, and then I was a bit tired of the farm as one gets, and was looking for a little bit of a change of pace, and a bit of a kind of a further mental application of everything I had learned on hand on the farm. So yeah, I came here to do this master called New Food Thinking. Um, but yeah, so I've kind of come through this master with this agricultural lens, and kind of coupled with my newfound interest in wine. It all kind of came together to lead me to the vineyard where I spent my summer, and from which the experience of which I from which I wrote this thesis.
Where were you
So
growing? Where were you growing vegetables? Where are you farming?
yeah, this was in Virginia. I'm originally from California, and I went to UC Santa Cruz and did the agroecology program there.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, my godparents have a farm in Virginia, kind of a grass-fed cattle ranch in southeastern Virginia, just outside of Norfolk.
Okay.
Um, and they invited me to come grow vegetables on their farm, and it was really a beautiful opportunity. They gave me a patch of land and just said, kind of go for it. So with
I'm really
that,
curious.
yeah, please.
I'm really curious how, because I came from that area, sort of the extended Shenandoah Valley north into
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, where it becomes the Cumberland Valley, and then moved to California, where I've stayed.
Hmm.
So I did kind of like the reverse. What was it like coming east from California? Having been
Hmm.
born and bred out here.
Uh-huh. I get this question a lot. People always say, "Oh, that must have been such a big change," or "Wow, you must miss California so much." And honestly, I love the Southeast. I have totally fallen for it.
Yeah.
Because I was raised in the Bay Area, and over the course of my childhood, what I grew up in the East Bay in a small town called Pleasanton, and it really was a small kind of, it really truly was a pleasant little place, kind of out in those kind of rolling golden hills. And over the course of my childhood, it just got consumed by the urban sprawl of the Bay Area as Silicon Valley expanded. So to go from that to still just a green, rural southeast where the pace of life is a little slower, yeah, it's totally stolen my heart. So
Nice. Yeah. Beautiful. Um,
yeah.
so you ended up in Italy though, and
Mm.
you wrote this, but it was, what came first? Was it the uh, going to Ansitz-Dornach, or the going to school and then that led you to Ansitz-Dornach?
Yeah, exactly, the latter.
Okay.
So
Got it.
yeah, I came into this year, yeah, with all of these ideas floating around, but no particular direction. And just my godparents, while I was working at their farm in Virginia, kind of began to inculcate me with their love and passion for wine. And then being
Uh,
here, you're just consumed by it. And so I really fell in love with wine and viticulture, and through your podcast just got really inspired with viticulture. So I wanted to spend my summer. Part of our program is this obligatory 3-month internship. So I
Great.
decided to spend my internship, yeah, getting hands on in the vineyard, and seeing what kind of regenerative agriculture on a vineyard really looked like. Um, And yeah, I got connected to Dornoch through a friend that I made. I went to the Slow Wine Fair in Bologna last year, and
Uh-huh.
I made a friend there who had interned at Dornoch, so he made the connection for me.
Nice.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, we'll get into what it's like, but dang. Sounds pretty special. I'm jealous of even your work experience there. It sounds incredible. Um,
It's really been this place. There's really a magic to it. I mean, this year's just been a dream. So yeah.
mm, Fantastic. Well, you wrote this paper, and although part of it did have to do with, I mean, a big part of it is the case study of Dorna, and also, drawing from those experiences there. Another, I mean, I'd say it extends much bigger than that, and the scope is much broader than that, and really talks about biodynamics as a agroecological practice, and in the context of history, really. And I'll just start by saying your central argument is really pretty fantastic, and that's kind of the meat of what I'd love you to talk about, which is, if I can characterize this correctly, and correct me if I don't, but essentially say that the success of biodynamics as an agroecological system, as in its measurable ability to boost soil organic matter, soil microbial diversity, and above ground farm biodiversity, doesn't happen in spite of its spiritual foundation, but because of it.
Hmm.
Um, is that a good characterization of your thesis
Yeah.
to a
Yes.
certain extent?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly.
Like the
I
spirituality the spiritual approach to agriculture is essential to its efficacy.
Yeah. Indeed. I think they're kind of one and the same, or they kind of beget each other.
Hmm.
Or Yeah. So I think to establish this link. I mean, I don't think it's. That's the thing, is that the spirituality is not entirely necessary, because biodynamics now is a pretty codified system of practices. So one could be biodynamic certified without necessarily being so spiritually involved.
Hmm.
Um, but but for me, I mean, the spirituality is really represents kind of a deeper, uh, fundamental kind of shift in perception that to me feels like the requisite shift that we as humans need to make to kind of correct our relationship with nature, or realign ourselves, um, with the living world. Um, so this is what I was getting at, is that so much of the speak about biodynamics is about whether it's efficacious or not, and it's kind of the lack of measurability around its preparations is often the source of its discounting.
Right.
Uh, because people say, you can't measure the effects; it's no better than normal compost teas, so biodynamics is nonsense. Um, but to me, that kind of measurability is besides the point, because so much else stems from the spiritual connection that leads to a kind of a fruitful, life promoting agricultural practice, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, at the same time that you're saying that, there have been now some recent studies that I just read, some peer-reviewed papers that have been put out about, the preps, and studying their efficacy, and have found some really incredible findings. It just
Huh.
took 100 years for
Yes.
somebody to do the study. It's almost
Yes.
more that it hasn't been attempted to be measured, rather than it's unmeasurable. I think
Yes.
in a lot of cases it's been so dismissed or discounted that people didn't even see it as worthy of trying to, do any research. And to some extent, it seems like, I mean, I could be wrong about that, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but
No.
no, yeah,
Exactly.
I,
And I. No. Please go ahead.
No, no. The only thing I was going to say is I have a couple papers that I will link to
Ah,
in the show notes for this, or at least on the episode website on beyondorganicwine.com, so that
yeah.
that's there, as well as with your permission, this paper as well.
Yes, yes, of course. This paper is open access as far as I'm concerned.
Uh,
But yeah, to your point, I agree. I mean, and that's really nice to hear that kind of the scientific verifiability is catching up. But I think the efficacy of biodynamic practices has been long noted anecdotally. I mean, I take quite seriously the story of, I believe it was your interview with, I'm forgetting his name, but from Tablas Creek that you just released. And
oh yeah,
he
Jason. Yeah.
exactly, and the story of the severe reaction that one of his employees had to one of the sprays. I mean,
Oh,
that
that
right
wasn't
there is
Jason. Yeah, that was, well, I think I mentioned that story while talking to Jason, but yeah, that was Derek Trowbridge. Yeah,
exactly.
who's,
Excuse me.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, that's a
Um,
really good example. But also, I mean, I think what the observations at Tablas Creek that Jason mentioned, where they just tasted their wines made from the different blocks, some that were just farmed organically and some
mm,
that were farmed biodynamically. And in blind tastings, the whole staff essentially
mm,
preferred the biodynamically farmed
okay.
wines.
Uh-huh.
And
Exactly.
so then they just switched the whole vineyard. At that point,
Yeah.
they're like, "Well, I don't know. I think that's
Exactly.
measurable enough for
Yeah.
our purposes."
Yes.
um, yeah. So and
Yeah.
yeah, so there is some fun stuff like that, and I take seriously that kind of stuff as well. I also, I think if we can start down this path with your definition of spirituality, like to dig in deeper to this, I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. So where I'm coming at with my lens of spirituality is not so much. I think spirituality is often thought about as this kind of far off, ethereal, kind of astral connection to planes that are beyond this living world. And I think an openness to this kind of far outness is important and may well be part of it. But to me, what spirituality means is to kind of to be here now and really this tangible connection to the living world around us. To look at a tree not just as this thing, but to really recognize that this is this miraculous, immensely complex living being, and not just a single being, but that intimately tied with kind of this expanding infinity of relations below ground and above. So just to recognize that immensity, the grandeur, the magic of the living world around us, and to really feel that from a subjective perspective. That's kind of what I'm getting at with in my speak of spirituality in this paper, which I think is very different from how it's normally conceived. And I think that that kind of typical conception of that is kind of this woo-woo, far-off fantasy of other worlds is what leads to its to people casting it aside and not paying much attention to it or not taking it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you bring up the and the language that you use, the miraculousness of the tree and like this incredibly complex thing, this and the web and interconnection of things. Is that I hear that in what you're saying about spirituality. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that's very,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's like it's more, yeah, it's a recognition that we are kind of alive in this strange, amazing existence. It's strange to find ourselves alive here, and I think to come from that place and really, really, really connect with our living essence and the essence of the world around us, I think naturally imbues us into caring or induces us into caring relationships with the living world. I mean, if you have a sense of that miracle, how could you not but want to care for the living world? Because recognizing that the living nature of the world around you is also is the same source of your living nature. So I see it as all kind of interconnected, and yes, one and the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think in I mean in your paper, in making the case between spirituality and ecologically sound agriculture like biodynamics, you make the point that many of these Western forms of agriculture, quote, are but recent echoes of long integrated, spiritually imbued understandings of nature found in other cultures. Now
Mm,
viewed through the lens of scientific study, such traditional knowledge is confirmed to correlate with biological and ecological principles.
mm.
And I'm wondering, that becomes a theme that you explore, and I'm wondering if you could give some examples of that, because that's what I hear as we're talking about spirituality. I hear this sense of the fact that we grew out of this earth, and we
Mm.
grew originally as ecological beings, inextricably tied to our environment. And it's
Yes,
only been recently that we see ourselves as separate.
yes,
And that, right, spirituality has been given this patina of sort of spacey, far out things, but it's really this deep, to me, another way to think of it is the opposite. It's like this deep grounding in a complex world that we are inextricably tied to, and
yes,
the sort of intuitive understandings that come when you are reconnected and re-immersed in that ecology as a
yes.
living being. So I wonder if you can talk about some of those examples, like some of the traditional, the way that these spiritually imbued understandings grow out of these sort of traditional knowledges and biological, become these currently scientifically understood biological and ecological principles.
Yeah, sure. There's actually a very recent example I just came across from Robin Wall Kimmer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. She just wrote a beautiful piece online. I'm happy to send you the link about the Three Sisters form of
Oh,
agriculture.
oh, I love, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really beautifully done. But it's exactly this. She was exploring the long tradition of corn cultivation and the reverence that Native Americans say held for corn, and just that through their relationship with their corn and through their kind of you know intuitive ecological understanding, they came up with essentially an intercropping system of growing corn amongst leguminous beans, amongst pumpkins, all of whom work very synchronously to kind of mutually benefit each other so that each grows well. And this kind of agriculture, actually, I'm working on another piece right now that talks about this. Is that this kind of intuitively led them to this style of agriculture led them to like no-till agriculture. They weren't often plowing their land or working their land, which led to the saving of their soil organic matter relative to when the European colonizers came in with plows and readily washed a lot of that topsoil away.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's a very beautiful example I just came across. So
Yeah, I think another example you give is the sense of being part of. If am I getting that right? A sense of being part of a bigger whole.
yes, yes, yeah. So this is really important to biodynamic thinking. Actually, this kind of farm as organism approach.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the farm as organism idea is exactly this, that the understanding that nature works as kind of as one overarching organism, and each of us kind of individuals is playing our part as an organ that supports the wider functionality of this larger organism.
Hmm.
um, yeah, so bringing this to the farm level, biodynamics, naturally kind of incorporates biodiversity on the farm in consideration of their farm as a singular organism. So that looks like, especially applying this to Dornak, this looks like, yes, having the vineyards, but also having vegetable gardens and flower gardens and fruit trees scattered around. They have a diversity of animals. They have native forest kind of on all four sides of the farm. And it's in this diversity and in kind of the tying in of these life ways so that they're mutually supporting that kind of creates this overall wellness of the farm. And it's not only that this is it is kind of a self-contained organism, but it's also, of course, connected to the wider ecology. It's connected to the wider human community. In biodynamics, especially, it's all connected to the cosmos and cosmic energies. So yeah, this is I think is kind of foundational to the spiritual sense of oneness, is that we understand that what we do on the ground is intimately tied with everything around us and everything beyond us.
So if I'm creating a list in my head, because I wanted you to talk about some of the crucial features of spiritual agricultural approaches. What I've heard so far is the sense of caring that becomes imbued in the kind of farming that you do, like a deep sense of care, like caretaking, caring for,
Yes.
as well as connection with, and like this inextricable connection and overlapping. I guess I don't even know how to put it. Overlapping functionalities and benefits and
Yes.
symbioses that happen within these connections. Are there other crucial features of spiritual agricultural approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think this notion of care is super important. And yeah, I have to give credit to a few researchers that I came across while researching this paper. One is Anna Piggott, another is Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, and one is Anna Krzywazinska. I'm sure among others, these three researchers really talk about and kind of define this notion of care. And the idea of care is kind of actively attending to other beings around us, and paying attention to beings kind of as they are. So especially say in conventional agriculture, a lot of our decisions are made kind of from our anthropocentric kind of human point of view. Whereas, when we say recognize the value of the living beings around us, then, we're motivated to attend to them with kind of this caring notion to nurture them as they, in a way that supports their own innate, health and wellness. So, for example, what this looks like in soil care, it's really paying attention to soil microbiology and how the soil food web functions. And then the role of the farmer is to support those life ways from taking place. It's supporting fungi and bacteria and plants to all interact in the harmonious way that they naturally do so, rather than kind of jumping in and plowing because we feel we need to aerate the soil. We feel that we need to let water percolate better. It's kind of taking the opposite stance where we kind of let the beings of our farm speak for themselves and then do our best to care for them how they want to be cared for. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, so it's in terms of caring, there's this sense of valuing the non-human in the same way that you would care for the human, in the same way that you would value the human. What is the importance of spirituality in informing our human, non-human agricultural relationships?
Yeah, it's. I really think it's this, as you say, it's kind of reorienting our value systems, where we engage with the world by with this sense of value for life itself. Um, and this gets tricky, especially when we're running businesses, right, where there's a very clear
Well, that's the next question. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, when there's a very clear monetary value system. But yeah, I think really the fundamental difference, as I said, if spirituality is coming from this sense of oneness and the sense of the miracle of the living world around us, then in our agricultural practices, it looks like kind of valuing life for its own sake, and placing a high value on the well-being and the flourishing of the life around us.
When you say for its own sake, you're contrasting that to the alternative. Could you sort of characterize the alternative?
Yeah, so I suppose the direct alternative is for either its utility or its monetary value.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, for example, it's a pretty stark contrast at Dornach. So Ansi's Dornach, which is the vineyard that I'm referencing in my paper. It's this really beautiful, diverse vineyard that's, if you're not familiar with the landscape of South Tyrol, it's this beautiful stark valley with this flat valley bottom that rises to these high mountain peaks on either side.
Hmm.
So Dornach is kind of up on the hillside overlooking the valley. And Dornach, you look at Dornach, it's this beautiful kind of diverse, interspersed forest with vineyards, with gardens. And then you look down to the valley floor below, and all you see is a patchwork of straight lines and, single species of trees, most of which are apple trees, or, straight lines of vines
Hmm.
that go as far as the eye can see. Um, yeah, so you see this pretty stark contrast of a place that places a high value on the flourishing of life for its own sake versus that values plants based on their productivity and their marketability, um, which when beings are, if you take a tree as a living being and put it in a straight line and you're extracting all it has to give just for that extraction, I mean that's a pretty kind of dystopian, kind of enslaving style of relating to other beings, which is very different from if you approach the world as a living place, and beings as living beings that are valuable for their own sake.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really stark characterization.
Yeah.
And I'm going to quote you. You say the profit motive, which is in your paper, which is greatly encouraged by market demand and tempts the prioritization of immediate gain, has a potential to strongly influence the organization and practices of a farm business. We see through the history of agriculture how prioritization of income has shaped conventional farm businesses and the resultant externalization of ecological costs.
Yeah.
And you just gave a really good example of that. Um, can you sort of describe also, expanding on what you were just saying, and we can kind of move to Ansis Dornach as an example of this, but how this idea of the farm as an organism works, and what are some of the things that you've seen from your observation?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, so the farm as organism, kind of as I described it as a concept earlier, is really beautiful in practice, and it's something that you've kind of spoken a lot on with your guests in your podcast, previously. So the farm as organism, I mean, it looks like diversity,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So for example, I kind of in the paper, I kind of do this walk through the vineyard,
Yeah.
to show kind of this cyclical ecology of the farm as organism. So what it looks like is living soil, where you have your fungi and your bacteria and all the soil organisms working together, that gives rise to a diversity of plant cover in the vineyard rows. So, like at Dornach, for example, you see a great array of diversity in the rows. There's no bare ground anywhere. It's all covered, and there's a mix of grasses and flowering plants and wild aromatic herbs. It's just kind of this bursting diversity of life under the vines. And then, of course, there's the vines themselves, of which there's a great diversity. And then there's the surrounding forest. And then, this is, it's not all happening at once. There's also a temporality to this, but say after harvest at Dornach, they have a pair of cows and a pair of donkeys and a little herd of sheep that all get their run through the vineyards once the grapes are off, of course.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, they are just happy as can be walking through the rows, of course, munching down that diverse plant cover, dropping their manure everywhere and stomping it in through the rows. And then of course there's wild animals like birds flitting around. So yeah, you can kind of see how each of these organisms is kind of playing its own role to feed into the wellness of the other organisms. Say the animals walking through the vines after harvest, they are munching on the plant cover, which is servicing their own needs, right? They're getting this diverse array of rich forage, and simultaneously, by them being cared for, they're dropping manure into the rows and fertilizing the vines and fertilizing the soil microorganisms, which are then, of course, giving rise to more plant cover, more healthy vines, and then for the next year will be more feed for the animals. And you see how care for each organism is kind of built into this kind of circular system, in which care for every being is taken care of just by being themselves within the system.
Yeah, that's lovely. Now, there are some realities to operating a spiritual farm in a materialistic world.
Yeah.
We've talked about some of those, by email and everything. But yeah, I mean, this is, it's real stuff. And I'd love you to get into some of these questions that you've been asking and where these compromises, where these places of friction happen.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, you can probably hear in how I've already been speaking is I'm a bit of a romantic, uh, and I really had this vision that if you had a diverse enough ecological system, that there would be this system of checks and balances in place that would really keep everything at bay, keep everything in balance. There wouldn't be so many disease outbreaks. There would pests would be kept in control. And so I was really hopeful coming into this vineyard that I would come into this highly developed kind of farm ecology and would see this kind of romantic utopian balance. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way that Mother Nature says differently. This year in South Tyrol was a really, and I guess this goes for most of Italy in general, was a really wet season. All through the late spring, there was serious rain, which of course was at prime time to hit the vines with powdery and downy mildew. And so this hit really hard. So I arrived at Dornach in July, and again had this rosy vision coming in. And literally week one, I see Patrick, who's the owner of Ansis Dornach, Patrick Uccelli. I see him out on the sprayer, and of course they're organic and biodynamic certified. So this was a formulation of copper and sulfur, but still the rainy conditions were forced him to be on that sprayer, 2, 3, 4 times a week sometimes.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really, and it was kind of jarring for me because I was coming to a place that of course cares so much about the farm ecology, Uh, but then simultaneously, I'm seeing them blasting the fields with fungicides. And I'm not the biggest expert on this, but I looked into just copper a little bit, and I know that copper accumulates in the soil and can be quite toxic to soil microorganisms. So all of a sudden, this paradox emerged that challenged my romantic view, and it really made me think about, this strange tension that there is between, on one end, highly valuing life for its own sake, while operating your farm in a business where the value has to be monetary for the whole system to keep functioning. Um, and so in exploring this topic, and of course speaking with the farmers and getting their view of things, I saw that it really becomes kind of this necessary compromise, where, as Patrick expressed, this is his point of view, but he says, here we don't do nature. Nature is, the untouched forest out there. He said, we're working, in a highly, kind of compromised landscape as it is. The fact that this native forest has been cleared for vineyards already is a serious compromise for the landscape. So he says we're already working in a compromised landscape. So interventions are necessary to keep this whole system running. And to keep the system running requires the income that's coming from the grapes. So it's this compromise between prioritizing your marketable crop and prioritizing the lives of your farm. And I think what Dornoch does really beautifully, it's not at all that they were just recklessly spraying. It was highly calculated, and
Sure.
they expressed, and they expressed that they weren't glad to be spraying the vines, but they feel that it's kind of the necessary compromise to make, so that they can keep their business operating, so that their business can continue to steward the land in all of the other ways that they do, as well as their engagement with the surrounding community. Their goal is to have their philosophy bleed out into the larger food system and make a change locally and hopefully further out. And so, unfortunately, this is kind of a short-term compromise that they have to make to spray the vines to get their crop to the end, to harvest. But overall, it's a consideration of the net benefit, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that sounds like a really great nuanced explanation of something that most people, and I'm so glad you chose spraying as the compromise issue, because this is not seen as a compromise in most viticulture right now, even organic or biodynamic viticulture. I mean, spraying is considered just part of viticulture, like an inextricable part of it. And this is a big thing that I'm focusing on now, which is like getting people to question that, getting people to ask, is it a necessary part? Do we have to spray? And what if we didn't? Like, what would that change about the way that we farm grapes?
Yeah.
And I know Dornoch is growing peewees, right? They are not all, but some, right? So they are trying to make that change as much as the market allows for them to be able to spray less.
Yes, exactly. So, Dornoch really prides themselves on growing peewee varieties, which are hybrid varieties between Vitis vinifera and I believe most of theirs are North American crosses. This is part of their goal, is that they understand something that you've talked so much about, that Vitis vinifera is a non-native grape variety that they're trying to grow in a very different set of conditions from where it evolved. And so naturally, it's more intensive to keep it alive and healthy in this different ecology. So they're really excited about this new wave of peewee varieties. And South Tyrol actually is quite a rich peewee area. I think it's one of the few regions in Italy where peewees are even allowed legally at all. Which is
that
yeah.
That did change. I'll just throw in a couple caveats here. In 2021, the EU did expand to allow pewees in DOPs because of
Huh.
climate change. So they realized, if we're going to actually adapt to climate change with the wine industry, we need to allow these things. So that happened in
Oh, super.
2021. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that most people realize it was illegal in European DOPs to use
Yeah.
any kind of hybrid. Like it was literally
Yes.
like pure blood vinifera only
Yep.
allowed
Yep.
for the last, whatever, 80 years.
Yes.
So, and then I think now you're saying vinifera isn't native, but I think vinifera is native to there. I mean, there's definitely varieties, or at least it's been there long enough to consider itself native. It probably is doing poorly in that area, even though it's from there, because of just years of cloning and using the same
Yes.
varieties that have been
Yes.
around for hundreds of years, rather than breeding new and breeding, stirring that genetic gene pool and letting the grapes adapt.
For, for
And
sure.
and also because of globalization, because we brought, now grapes have been traded around the planet, and there are, downy mildew wasn't a thing in Europe until we brought over North American varieties of
Yes.
grapes with downy spores on them. So
Yes.
just
Yeah.
yeah, we've forced them into a need to adapt.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to spell that out so we weren't spreading misinformation there.
Yeah, no. Thank you. And look, I'm young and I'm not the biggest expert on this, so I'm still very much in my learning process. So no, thank you. Of
Oh
course.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah,
Well,
no, of
and
course. Please.
and in addition to, well, I mean, did you want to wrap up what you were saying, or were you finished? I had a
Yeah,
question. Please.
sure. Yeah, so I think the peewees are exactly this. It's this recognition that our climate is rapidly adapting and conditions are rapidly evolving, and so for sustainability heading into the future, breeding new genetics is a super important part of this. Um, and I guess to the point of compromise, this is an interesting point of compromise for them as well, because as they expressed to me, they're fully on board with peewees, and ultimately their goal, I think, is to grow 100% peewees. But as we know, peewees and hybrid varieties have a tough time breaking into kind of the old school wine market, and so they're caught in this interesting in between where they're slowly prioritizing peewees more and more and trying to educate about peewees more and more to build awareness. But simultaneously, it's the Pinot Noir that's bringing in the money to run the business. So again, it's this strange point of compromise where operating a business with, you know, uh, it's kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and you're doing your best to make it work, but there's kind of two fundamentally different systems at work that kind of force these compromises to happen.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in terms of compromises, I mean, another one that's maybe, I mean, like I said, I really love that you used spraying as the example, because it's not even seen as a compromise for most people. But one that I think is that we could talk about is birds, for example,
Yes.
and what that means for a vineyard. And I mean, I'm considering. I mean, well, I'm considering planting a vineyard in your region of the world, of the East Coast, not Italy. I mean, I'd love to, I'd love to do one in Italy.
If you need some
But
Italian lessons, I'm happy to help.
I've been working on it. I've only been to the South. From Rome down, basically, including
Hmm.
Sicily, but the
Oh,
North, I
beautiful.
can't wait. Yeah.
Oh, please, yeah, please come. It's
Ugh,
fantastic.
oh my gosh, I can't wait. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, and just in thinking, on the East Coast of the U.S., it's, like, I don't know globally how, if people realize, it's sort of like trying to grow chickens in the jungle, where there's just so many things that want to eat your chickens,
Yeah.
like, I mean, there's raccoons, there's bears, there's like,
Yes.
in addition to birds, there's deer, and these are all like, some of these are big, like if a bear
Yeah.
wants your grapes, a bear can get your grapes. It doesn't matter if you have a 10-foot deer fence or whatever, and these are realities. And so it's like, how to manage for that in a system where you're trying to be productive and make a living.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a real question. I mean, it's a big question and something that I think everybody listening who is involved in this at any level understands.
Yeah.
And yet, the place where I want to grow grapes, I love because of all that wildlife. Like you said, it's that, I'm drawn to that place spiritually
Yeah.
because it is so biodiverse and so beautiful.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to do is kick those beautiful creatures out of their home because I want to play, because I want to grow some grapes there. And so it is, I mean, this is probably the fundamental question at the heart of the farm design that I'm working on, is how to incorporate more biodiversity without and make it economically viable without losing what's already there, without excluding the non-humans that are already there.
Yeah.
And answering that has a million forms. I mean,
Yeah.
there's because I mean, there are simple things, but they're very exclusive. They're very they're very harsh.
Yes.
And then
Yeah. I'm.
it becomes a nuanced, complicated answer to how do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, and it's totally an open question, and it's something that I've been really grappling with. I mean, even through this paper. Um, and that's the thing is like I mean maybe I was discounting my romantic view earlier, but I still wonder if there are ways to continue to kind of maximize diversity without, as you say, having to sacrifice so much. I mean, I think your idea of saying planting more than you need, having sacrifice zones, or at least uh, having the predatorial bird calls around, or where it's not this entire harsh kind of violent exclusion, but there's really intelligent, creative ways where we can still have our little haven, but still have this integrated ecology.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, it's a really big, I think really kind of boundary pushing topic that will really change how we see and do agriculture in the future.
Yeah, and as important as that is, and I do think it's really important. I agree with you about that. I also would love you to talk about some of what you found out in the course of writing this paper about how like a spiritual farm might actually take better care of the humans as well as the non-humans in that system.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the thing is that it, it, it doesn't quite align if one creates this beautiful diverse farm of which humans aren't really a part, or even conceive of it that way, because of course humans are an integral part of the farm system. I mean, the kind of the farm as organism and all these kind of intertangling organism life ways, that like that doesn't happen without the human hand. So of course, like the farm system is kind of fundamentally human, and so the humans they serve as one of these critical organs in the farm body, perhaps even so central as the heart. And so, of course, the health and wellness of the humans is part and parcel of the health and wellness of the farm. Um, so yeah, Dornock in that way, implemented a lot of really beautiful business practices that actively promote the well-being of the employees and the interns on their farm. So one example,
Yeah. Yeah, please.
yeah, please. So one example is these daily farm lunches. And so every day at noon, work stops dead. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. The church bell down the street strikes noon, and you drop everything and head to the house for lunch. And this was a kind of a non-negotiable 90-minute rest period every single day. And like as you know, and as any farmer knows, I mean, farming gets intense and things are stressful. Things have to get done. And it's very easy to sacrifice on this time for personal well-being in order to get your to-do list done. But at Dornoch, that is absolutely non-negotiable, and you get in trouble if you show up late. So
Yeah.
it's taken very seriously. But yeah, these communal lunches would be these beautiful, really feasts that really showed off the abundance coming off the farm. So there was, always meat that had been raised on the farm and butchered on the farm. Josef, who is Carolina's grandfather, was this really, really sweet old kind of Tyrolean mountain man. And he had this amazing old cellar under the house where he was curing his own speck and making his own sauerkraut, and had his table wine. And so there was always, a slab of this homemade speck and this sauerkraut and table wine, vegetables from the garden, fruit from the fruit trees, fresh cheeses from the goats. And it was a time when everyone would get together. I mean, during harvest time, this was 15 people coming together all at once to sit and just enjoy this convivial relaxation time every single day. So this was kind of, yeah, and so to not only nourish our bodies with the most amazing food that we've played a role in growing, but also, to nourish the social culture of the farm and bring everybody together as friends and family, really.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, is that year round or is that just at harvest?
This was year round. I mean, so the size of the lunch expands during harvest for sure, but
Right,
this was,
right, right. That's fantastic. Yeah.
but yeah, this was all year. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just spent September in Vermont with La Garagista, and that was one of the things that really impressed me as well. Was these? I mean, it wasn't at the strike of the church bell, but sometime around 12:30 to 1:30, we all took a break that lasted at least 90 minutes. Some days longer.
Yes.
Involved, like you said, like local, veg that was grown often right next to where we were eating, and wines that were grown that were often highlighting what we were working with that day,
Yes.
um, and from previous vintages, and then allowed time for short naps before returning.
Yeah.
Just
That's a
very.
luxury we did not have, but that's impressive.
Oh, that's too bad. You gotta talk to them.
Indeed.
Give some feedback. Yeah, it's I mean, and it really does change the experience of work in general. Like it's amazing. It's really like at times you're like, oh man, I feel like I need to get back to work. But then like
Yeah.
when you know what I mean, like it almost feels like that's an addiction that you need to break in a sense, not in a healthy way. I mean, not like obviously the
Yes.
work needs to get done, but there's a very
Yeah.
human quality to that practice.
Yeah, no,
And
exactly. It kind of ties your rhythms to the rhythms of the farm. It's easy. We have this kind of It's common for us to have this kind of work-life balance, this work-life separation. But maybe I hope this is not just particular to Dornoch, but really life and work become kind of one and the same, but not in a bad way. It's where, life and work are happening at the same time, but it's all part of this beautiful process of nourishing both the land and our human selves.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Well,
Hmm.
where are there any final things? There's a quote I want to from your paper that I would love to use as a final quote, but I would also love to hear from you if there's anything that we've left out that you find really important.
Sure. Um,
I mean, I know we've left out a lot, like it's a 40-page plus paper, but
yeah.
and your thoughts are much bigger than the paper as well. So, and your
Indeed.
experience at Dornach is much bigger. So anything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so really, really, just for me, I think the key and what really inspired this paper, and what ultimately came out of it is that it really feels like, um, repairing our nature with or our relationship with nature through our agriculture. I think begins from this fundamental, shift in our own heads. Like that's the thing, is it's like it's a subjective shift that kind of needs to happen. So it's kind of beyond codification or methodologies.
Hmm.
I speak about this in my paper, about addressing an apparent kind of issue with certification. I know that, say biodynamic certification has a lot of benefits for many farmers, and there's many reasons to doing it. But for example, at Dornak, the biodynamic certification actually for them isn't the most important thing in terms of representing their spiritual relationship with their land. There's a lot of practical reasons that they go for certification. I mean, it helps their marketability. It's a way, kind of, now in the name of your podcast, beyond organic, kind of certification of their practices that speaks a little more to their values. Um, but but for them, like really the important thing is the practices on their land, and certification can often get wrapped up in these I don't know, these metrics. And like they shared with me that when the biodynamic certifier comes, much of that time is spent in the office going over records and papers, and it's very little of that time is spent actually out on the farm, going around and seeing the biodynamic farm organism at work, which I think says something about the certification that can't really touch that deeper spiritual core that reorients, how we see nature, how we relate to our land in intuitive and caring ways.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, to me, kind of the crux of the paper, the crux of the thesis is that it's this deeper spiritual shift that I think is really needed in our world today, especially facing all the crises. It seems that a lot of it has to do with our fundamental disconnection from nature. So to me, it's this kind of spiritual shift that comes from the inside, that that um, that is really important to kind of start working into our lives, heading into our future.
Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah. Do you know, have you read, because I know you quoted him, have you read the book, The Biology of Wonder?
Is this Andreas Weber?
Yes,
Okay, so interestingly enough, I haven't read this book. I've heard you mention it before, so it's on my to-do list.
me
But
too.
Andreas Weber, oh,
I've
okay,
started it. I know I'm really excited about it. I can't, but I haven't added it to my like recommended list just because I haven't finished it, and I feel like I need to actually read the whole thing before I, fully endorse it. But already
okay,
the ideas are revolutionary enough that yeah, I can definitely say it's worth checking out.
yeah, yeah, and it's on my to-do list because Andreas Weber is actually he was a professor of mine this past year. He came and taught a
Oh,
class to us this
oh,
year. Yeah.
how was that?
Amazing, really, really amazing.
What was the class called?
It's called Enlivenment.
Ah, so that was the
Um,
name of the class. Wow.
yes, and that's a name of, I don't think it's a full book, but I think it's a paper that he's
Yeah,
written.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
So yeah, I actually got to know him a little bit, and I mean, it's amazing. And if for different students have different reactions to it, because, for example, one day he has us go and sit with a tree and kind of have a conversation with a tree. And for a lot of students, that turns them away. They're like, "Why am I talking to this tree? This is dumb." Uh, but the point, his thesis is exactly this, that like about re-enlivening our world and really taking seriously that the world around us is creative and living and I don't know about conscious, but likely sentient and feeling in some way.
Yeah.
So it's about engaging with the world in that way. Yeah, no, he's a really amazing man.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of those great. I think the reason I find it so important is, especially in the context of what we're talking about, is it sort of bridges that gap between once and for all between the spiritual and the scientific in a way. If that's a fair characterization, I don't know, but okay, I'll get to the end of the book and let you know for sure. But
Yeah.
but it really does. It almost is a re-understanding of science, like, because he is fully grounded in science, and so it's not like you could discount him as, or dismiss it as like the spiritual woo-woo thing,
Yes.
which like, again, we're not dismissing the spiritual here at all, but if you were inclined to, it would be really hard to dismiss him on those grounds, because it's coming from a hard science. Like, every principle that he's talking about is built from just a scientific biological understanding of nature and the way nature works, and
Yes.
causes us, when looked at from this perspective, to reevaluate our own understanding of like how how it works, and how, and
Yes.
that part of it, as you were saying, like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No, no, exactly. Because yeah, he is a trained biologist himself, right? And
right,
he expressed to us in class how kind of, how dark it got to be studying life by killing it, because everything they were studying were these specimens that were brought into their lab out of their natural context to be dissected, to be understood, which
right,
in which he just recognized the fundamental paradox of trying to understand life by killing it.
right,
Um, yeah. So, well, yeah, which I think is really indicative of the problem, is that there's a tendency to want to, extract things for study out of their living context, when what we are is constantly in relation with everything around us, and inseparable from those relationships.
right. Yeah, it's yep. Well said.
Yes.
Well, and the other thing that's well said is this quote that you sort of end on, if I may. The
Hmm.
transition from economic to biophilic value systems is challenging and puts farmers in the middle of difficult ethical dilemmas. But it is an unavoidable requirement as we attempt to reorient our culture away from anthropocentrism and back toward our place within the web of life on Earth. A spiritual shift that understands the human as part of the web of life and understands our wellness as the wellness of the whole is the critical first step in repairing this relationship and leading us into healthier, life promoting interbeing with our land. I think that's really well said.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think this just tries to sum up that, of course, as we have one foot in the modern capitalist economy, kind of necessarily,
Right,
yeah, and so it's this is the cause of the tension, between valuing life and valuing money, but it's that friction that I think illuminates the problems, and forces us into positions where we have to rethink, really fundamentally rethink how we're doing things. Like your question earlier, like, do we have to spray? That's a kind of
right,
a commonly accepted canon of viticulture, but is it the case? So I think this friction, forces us into the questions that will ultimately lead us back to, or not necessarily back to, but to more life promoting ways of being with our land.
lovely. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
writing this paper, and thank you for sharing it, and for sharing it with me, but also, I will be sharing it. And so I thank you in advance for allowing me to share this with everyone who desires to read it.
Yeah.
Really such good stuff, and highly recommend for everyone. And
Cool.
is there any, do you want people to get in touch with you or anything like that? Or
Yeah, yeah, of course. You can reach me. I'm still, I'm a newly graduated student, so I don't have any official website or anything. But, but you're super welcome to reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is Cam Grows.
Cam
Um,
Grows.
yeah, yeah, and please feel free to reach out there. And yeah, I'm happy to share with my thesis, or for you to share your thesis. Like I said, it's open access. And no, I really appreciate your time and being willing to read such a paper. I know it's it's you can't just do it over morning coffee. It's a bit of a read. But really, I appreciate your support, and your willingness to allow me to share. It's
Well,
really such a pleasure.
Ah, my pleasure too. Well, and I'll be honest, I put it off for a while because I wanted to sit down and read it at once, and then I started reading it, and I was like, oh wow, this keeps going, but I can't stop, and so I kind of my whole morning got rearranged because I had to finish it. It was,
Wow.
that's a compliment. It was definitely like
Yeah.
once I got into it, I was like, oh, this is fantastic.
Wow.
I want to keep reading.
That is
Um,
really a high compliment, Adam. So really, thank you.
well, all right. Well, thank you again, and good luck. Yeah, you're still wrapping up, right? You've got
Yeah,
to finish school.
yeah. I'm actually graduated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So
I
my
mean,
master's
why
is
leave,
finished,
right?
and
Why leave such a place?
I know it's really really hard to, and I'm doing my best not to.
Fantastic. All right. Well, good
Yes.
luck on that front
All
as
right.
well.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I don't know if you've been watching the pesticide news lately, but there was a really interesting study released lately in which over half of the wines tested contained detectable amounts of at least one pesticide. Often they contained more than one. And close to half of the pesticides detected are carcinogenic. The wines tested were all widely available wine, similar to the Dowls and J-Lors and Veuve Clicquots that everyone is buying for holiday parties at this time of year. Another interesting study I discovered this week that collected data on unintentional acute pesticide poisoning globally found that 44% of farmers annually are poisoned by pesticides. That is a huge number if you stop and think about it. So this is just an appeal to be thoughtful about the wine that you buy for your holiday parties and celebrations this year. Maybe consider buying a wine for which you know the grapes or fruit were farmed without pesticides. My winery, Centralis, is one of those pesticide-free wine options, and you can find it at centraliswine.com. But I'm sure you have options wherever you are as well. Have a delicious and joyful solstice season.